14th, 2012 started as a day like any other at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Then, at approximately 9:35 a.m., the unthinkable happened. A 20-year-old assailant shot his way into the school. Armed with 3 weapons, including a semi-automatic rifle, the shooter took the lives of 20 6- and 7-year-old children and 6 adults. Unfortunately, this is not a new occurrence in the United States. How do we stop it? How do we make sure our children are safe? We try to answer those difficult questions right now on a special edition of Windy City Live. Welcome to the show. Tomorrow marks the 1-year anniversary of the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. And as you can see, we are very much in the holiday spirit around here, much like those families were a year ago. Our set is decorated for the holidays. Their homes were too. And in a moment, those families' lives were turned upside down on December 14th, 2012. No one can forget that day. I mean, no one. 26 people, 20 of whom 6 and 7 years old only, were gunned down in their own classrooms, their safe haven. My son is 6 years old. I cannot even imagine the pain that those parents must endure every single day. We want answers. We want to know what we can do to make sure that our children are safer. Ryan is off today. Filling in for him is ABC 7 Eyewitness News anchor Alan Krashevsky. G, of course, is following you at home on social media. Good morning to the both of you.
Good morning to you, Val, and it's good to be here. And really an important discussion at any time, but especially poignant given this 1-year anniversary of what happened in Newtown.
I know. I'm telling you, I look in my son's face all the time, and I cannot imagine a day. My daughter, too, for that matter, but to think that these were 6- and 7-year-old babies, because I still think of him as a baby. So, right. Of course, G is going to be talking with you. You are going to want to get into this hour. It's going to be an emotional hour. But you know what? It's hard to really put into words why we decided to do this show today. So we're going to let former Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Gifford say it best for us. Let's watch.
But I need to say something important. Violence is a big problem. Too many children are dying. Too many children. We must do something. It will be hard, but the time is now.
Yes, it is. So we've put together a special panel for today's show. Joining us from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, please welcome Dr. Nancy Zarz. And she's the leader of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Please say hello to Stephanie Gordon. Good morning, ladies. Good morning.
Great to have you both here with us.
Thank you for having me.
It is to talk about this. Like Alan said, it's something that we can't ignore. We have decided we're not going to do it here on Windy City Live. I think the question that I want to kind of set the tone for today is, are we any safer a year later? It'll be 1 year tomorrow of Sandy Hook. And do we feel that our kids are any safer in their classrooms a year later?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, there's more we could do. So education, training is what we need to make our schools and our society safer, and that's difficult to continue to implement across the country.
Right. What do you think, Stephanie?
We've had over 50 laws passed in 2013 that have made us arguably safer, where we've limited access to felons and people that have severe mental disease. It affects about 190 million of our 310 million population, so that's fantastic. We've also had over 20 states that have loosened their restrictions to guns and made it more easy and more accessible to carry guns throughout the streets.
This is a much more complicated issue. It always has been, and like you've mentioned, you have states that are relaxing what you would consider protections and others that are saying, no, we need to tighten them. This discussion goes on with people saying, which way do we go with this? Do you arm the public, more people, or do you simply try to restrict gun ownership to those who, however we can screen them and say, no, they do not have mental illness or something going on in the backgrounds that would indicate that they could be a threat?
Well, the problem with guns is that they elevate any reaction to a situation to a more lethal reaction. So if you get mad at somebody and you throw a punch, that's a radically different situation than if you get mad at somebody and you pull out a gun. So that's the concern, is that guns increase lethality. So I am of the opinion that I would rather us limit guns to those who are trained and those who have legitimate purposes for them.
Right, Stephanie, you're not saying take guns away with the moms demand action. You just want more sensible gun laws because you do believe in the Second Amendment rights.
Absolutely. We believe that you should be able to protect your family. We believe in skeet shooting. But we know that we have about 5% of the world's population and 50% of civilian-owned guns. Right here in the United States of America, we have 310 million guns, according to some data, and we have a 17 times more likelihood of having our children die here from gun violence than other developed nations. So if adding more guns is the right part of the equation, we've missed it. We have more guns than ever necessary, and it's not making us safer. Children are dying at 30% more from gun violence than in 1963.
Right. Well, this is a great fact from Slate.com. From 1980 to 2012, there have been 137 fatal school shootings, leaving 297 people dead.
Right.
So I think that I think the big confusing thing is that, we have these big moments like the Aurora shooting, the Newtown shooting, and then we think that there's going to be this swell of change. And then the statistics come in and it looks like more people are actually applying for gun ownership. That's what's very confusing. Why you think that there would be this outcry of all these people that have died innocently, and yet there's nothing really that's been changed?
Well, there's two things about that. One is that we tend to be a fast food society. So our attention is grabbed at these dramatic moments and then it dissipates with time. The second is that sometimes those dramatic moments scare people, and so they feel more of a need to get guns, and the training does not go with that. So we are arming ourselves faster than we are training and preparing ourselves.
Nancy, when you look at the backgrounds of people, and it seems like we get into this discussion a lot, as to how do you determine that somebody should be a person who should be allowed to own a gun and somebody who should not be? And we see this in many of these school shootings where an individual obviously is troubled, and in some cases they have a documented past of mental illness, but for whatever reason people didn't pass that information along, or they misread the privacy laws incorrectly, they were misinformed about that, and the person was either allowed to buy a gun legally, or the people who knew them did not recognize that they had serious mental illness problems and that they would be a real danger not only to themselves but to other people around them if indeed they had access to a weapon.
So I think the question is, what are the signs? I think you've said before too, even with the World Trade Center attack, the problem is that we want to take action 10 feet before the plane goes into the building. You have to take those steps way before when the planning is in process. But if you have no clue as to what someone's thinking, you say there are specific things that you can look for.
Absolutely.
Like what?
There's a pathway to intended violence, and the vast majority of these kinds of shooters follow that pathway to intended violence. So the first step is grievance, where you have a sense of injustice, whether it's real or perceived. That's the catalyst, but it's not enough because many of us have grievances. The second is ideation. That's where we fixate on that grievance and we make the decision that violence is the only means by which to avenge that injustice. Now, both of those two can be internal. I might talk about it, but I might not.
Exactly.
The third step is research and planning, and that's where you start to develop a plan of action to implement violence. The fourth step is preparation. This is where you now start to acquire the means. So maybe you do surveillance, maybe you do a security probe. Both of those two are public. Those are actions that we see. The fifth stage is breach, and that's where you're now putting the plan into action. If you picture an animal that's leaping, that's breach. And the sixth stage is attack. So the World Trade Center is a perfect image. If you picture the plane heading towards the World Trade Center, that's breach. Now, could we have intervened? Yes. There were things we could have done, but either we weren't ready or we weren't willing to make that decision. We need to intervene at stage 3 and 4. And we need to educate.
How so? How do you do that? How do you intervene with somebody who you say, they have potential here, they haven't done anything yet, but they have potential here, and what do we do to them
we educate the schools, the parents, the students, the staff, if we're talking school violence, about what are the signs and what are the things that we want them to report. Then we need to have a place for those people to report those things, and what we recommend is a threat assessment team. And this is where you have a team of an administrator, a law enforcement person, a psychologist, a legal person, and they assess the totality of that threat, including both risk factors and protective factors, and then we implement some kind of intervention.
And you're speaking more so at the school level, right?
But you could apply that same thing to workplace violence.
But I'm even thinking about at home, because I was reading about Adam Lanza, who committed the horrific crime on December December 14th, a year ago, and it talked about how he would not even let his mother in his bedroom. He covered his bedroom windows with black trash bags. He disliked birthdays, disliked holidays. You know, all of these things that, to me, his mother should have seen and alerted someone or somebody.
First of all, I don't want to comment on a specific person, ethically wise, APA violations.
But any advice to any parent
what
at home?
we need to do is a couple things. Put things in perspective. There's a lot of kids who aren't communicating that much with their parents.
Right.
There's a lot of kids who are in their rooms saying don't come out. But what we do need is to educate people. What do we want them to report, and then have somebody objective reporting that. But the other thing is to think about what are the barriers. So if I'm a mother, what would it take for me to report my son? We need to think about that and then implement that so that I am safe reporting my child, and my child will be dealt with professionally and compassionately. And that's where we all have a responsibility. We're not just talking to mother. All of us have a piece of this pie.
Let me piggyback on that. I feel like, you know, yes, parents have a responsibility, families have a responsibility, because inevitably we don't live in a bubble. What we do and what we let go by in our own, you know, closed walls affects the greater community, affects the world. And I think culturally, we all, just as citizens, American citizens, have a responsibility to take away the stigma from mental illness, to make it more approachable and easy for somebody to bring up that they're having issues with their child, that their child might be a little strange or eccentric, or, you know, maybe those aren't the correct psychological words, but I'm just saying that people feel this sense of that, oh, I feel shame about this. I can't talk about this. I can't open up. And then it's difficult to get help.
And then tragedy.
That's absolutely. It's not just mental illness. I don't want us to connect violence just with mental illness. I can be on this pathway to intended violence and not be diagnosed with any kind of mental illness. So, yes, mental illness is a piece, but it tends to be a pretty small piece of the violence puzzle.
Well, let me ask you, though. Go ahead.
Stage 4 that you're referencing, I think access and preparation is a place that we can impact. We can track large purchases of ammunition. We can track large purchases of guns. We can see if there's a spike in an environment that's unusual. So I think there are ways to tackle it from a gun perspective, gun access perspective, as well as mental health and safety.
It seems like in almost every case, and obviously it's hindsight, same thing with 9/11, where you say, oh my goodness, why didn't they see that? Why didn't they see this? Why didn't they stop that? In many of these cases, individuals had professional help along the way. What I'm talking about is therapy or whatever. Somebody was working with them, and maybe they were even prescribed pharmaceuticals to aid them in whatever they were dealing with. Not always, I know, but it always amazes me when we look in hindsight, you'd say, oh my goodness, why didn't somebody see that? So is it always so evident, is my question.
The problem is that one person might see it, but the beauty of a threat assessment team, and whatever you are, workplace violence, school violence, is that you get someone to identify the totality. Like in the Virginia Tech, you know, the counseling center knew this, and the police department knew this, and a professor knew this, and a family member knew this, and we tend to silo. We need interdisciplinary collaboration, and we need interdisciplinary assessment.
Absolutely.
So we look at both risk factors and protective factors, and then figure out how can we intervene.
And we need to reduce access on top of that.
On top of that. Well, we're going to continue this discussion coming up after the break. We're going to talk about risk factors and all the other components of this, but we wanted to share a very heartbreaking video that has recently gone viral. The mother of Sandy Hook victim, Emily Parker. She shares her pain and how God has helped her put this tragedy into perspective. You can see the full video on our website, and I recommend you do get a tissue because you will cry. We'll be right back.
Emily loved mornings. She loved making art.
Emily, look at my butterfly.
Emily loved being fancy. We received a box from the police of Emily's clothing that she was wearing. I had to see how she was hurt. And that pain is indescribable. People ask, but where was your God when this happened? Why didn't he stop it? God allowed others to kill his son. He allows for us all to make our own choices, good and bad, because that's the only way good can be in us, is if we freely choose it over all else.